She tried not to stare. Everything she had ever been taught screamed at her to look away, but she couldn't. The sight before her seemed to defy the very essence of her upbringing, a stark contradiction to the propaganda that had shaped her thoughts for as long as she could remember. Annalisa Müller stood at the edge of the makeshift compound, the chill of the late 1945 air biting through her thin, tattered uniform. Shadows danced across the ground as the late afternoon sun struggled to break through the overcast sky, casting a grey pall over the camp. The barbed wire fences loomed ominously around her, a constant reminder of her captivity, but her gaze was fixed on the British soldiers, gathered in a huddle a short distance away. They were laughing, their voices rich with camaraderie, a sound she had been taught to regard with disdain. Yet here they were, sharing their last rations amongst themselves, an act of kindness that felt foreign yet intoxicating. Annalisa felt her heart race, the thrum of confusion mixed with something she couldn't quite name, a flicker of hope, an inkling of humanity. This single moment would redefine her entire world. Before we uncover why, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, back to 1945. The camp was a dismal place, an undefined patch of land that had become a temporary home for those like her, prisoners of war whose lives had been upended by the chaos of conflict. The makeshift tents were worn and fraying, barely offering any warmth against the bitter wind that swept through the countryside. The earth beneath her feet was a muddy brown, stained by the rain that had fallen days before, and the smell of dampness mingled with the faint, acrid scent of smoke, wafting from the cooking pots of the guards. Annalisa was only 22, a nurse by training, who had once believed in the glory of the Reich. Raised within the confines of a family deeply entrenched in the Nazi ideology, she had been taught to view the Allies as monsters, invaders, destroyers of the homeland. Her childhood memories were woven with tales of heroism and sacrifice, stories that painted the world in black and white, where loyalty to the fatherland was paramount, and any hint of compassion towards the enemy was seen as betrayal. But now, here she was, a prisoner, stripped of her uniform and her dignity, forced to confront the reality of what war truly meant. Her mind was a battleground, a cacophony of fear and doubt. The very men she had been conditioned to despise were displaying a vulnerability that unnerved her. It was as if the walls of her indoctrination were crumbling, brick by brick, leaving her exposed to an unsettling truth. These soldiers were not the faceless monsters of her upbringing, but individuals with their own stories, fears, and struggles. Annalisa's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter once again, followed by the sight of a soldier, taller than the rest, breaking off a piece of bread and handing it to another man who looked gaunt and weary. The act seemed so simple, yet it resonated deeply within her, shattering the concept of the enemy she had held onto for so long. This was a moment of shared humanity that transcended the lines drawn by war. As she stood frozen in her spot, the weight of her internal conflict bore down on her. What was she supposed to feel? Anger, hatred, or perhaps something altogether new, a burgeoning empathy? The tension coiled tightly in her chest, each heartbeat echoing the battle between her ingrained beliefs and the reality unfolding before her. There was a flicker of movement from the corner of her eye, and she turned slightly, catching sight of a sergeant, his hardened features betraying a weariness that belied his stoic exterior. Sergeant Ewan Clark, a man whose presence had been intimidating and commanding. Yet in this moment he was merely watching, observing the exchange between his men. His eyes softened, a fleeting glimpse of understanding that people were more than the uniforms they wore. Annalisa felt her breath hitch in her throat. This was not how it was supposed to be. She had been trained to see them as enemies, to view their laughter as derision, their kindness as a ploy. But here, amidst the crumbling walls of her indoctrination, she found herself grappling with a truth she had never anticipated. The sight of the soldiers, so human, so relatable, was a jarring reminder that war stripped away the facades of enemy and ally, leaving behind the raw essence of survival and compassion. Annalisa knew she was on the precipice of a transformation, one that would challenge everything she had been taught. Could she allow herself to see these men not just as captors, but as fellow human beings? As the light began to fade, she felt a stirring within her, a yearning to bridge the gap that had been so carefully constructed by fear and prejudice. The question hung heavy in the air. Could she reconcile her identity as a German with the humanity of her captors? In that moment, Annalisa held her breath, caught between the past she had known and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The world around her faded, and all that remained was the undeniable truth. The lines of war were not as clear as they seemed. The compound was a grim testament to despair, surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers that loomed ominously against the grey sky. Annalisa's heart raced, a mixture of fear and curiosity gnawing at her insides. She had spent countless nights huddled in her corner of the barracks, listening to the whispers of her fellow prisoners, recounting tales of heroism and horror. Yet here she stood, grappling with the profound disconnect between what she had been taught and the humanity unfolding before her. As she peered through the wire, the scene played out like a cruel theater. British soldiers, their faces drawn and weary, gathered in a small huddle. The rations they had managed to scrounge were scant, barely enough to sustain them. Yet, in an act of unexpected kindness, one soldier, Private Thomas Bennett, was splitting a piece of bread with another, his eyes reflecting a vulnerability that was all too familiar to Annalisa. It struck her deeply. This was not the monster she had been warned about, but a man exhausted and scared just like her. The air was thick with tension, yet beneath it lay an undercurrent of something more: hope. Annalisa's mind raced back to her childhood, the idyllic days spent in the sun-drenched fields of Bavaria, where her father had proudly recounted tales of German strength and superiority. The slogans, the parades, the unwavering belief in the cause, they had all seemed so convincing then, but now those memories felt tainted, overshadowed by the stark reality of her current existence. She remembered the first time she had donned her nurse's uniform, filled with a sense of purpose and pride. She had believed she was serving her country, saving lives, healing the wounded, but the war had twisted everything into a grotesque caricature of duty. She was now a prisoner, stripped of her identity, forced to confront the very beliefs that had once defined her. Each day in the camp had chipped away at her resolve, and each act of kindness from her captors further blurred the lines she had been taught to draw. Annalisa took a deep breath, struggling to center herself. She had heard whispers of changes in the camp, rumors of new guards, perhaps even a transfer to a different location. The thought both terrified and excited her. What would it mean for her? Would it usher in a harsher regime, or might she encounter different men, perhaps even more like Thomas? She felt a flicker of dread at simply wanting to know them better, to understand the human beings behind the uniforms that had become so emblematic of her fears. As the days stretched on, Annalisa found herself observing the soldiers more intently. Their conversations were often laced with humor, a surprising antidote to the grim reality of their situation. She caught snippets of talk about home, the sweet smell of baked bread from their mothers' kitchens, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the dreams they had before the war had shattered everything. Each word resonated within her, igniting an inexplicable yearning for connection. But with each passing interaction, a war raged within her. The teachings of her youth fought against the humanity she now witnessed. They are still the enemy, she would tell herself, yet her heart whispered otherwise. How could these men, who shared their meager rations and laughter, embody the very essence of evil she had been led to believe in? One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the camp, Annalisa sat alone, her thoughts swirling like the autumn leaves that danced in the chill. The laughter of the soldiers echoed in the distance, mingling with the soft rustle of the wind. She felt an overwhelming urge to step closer, to cross that invisible line that separated her from them. But fear gripped her. Fear of rejection, fear of betrayal, fear of her own breaking heart. "What are you doing here?" A voice startled her. It was Sergeant Ewan Clark, his tone sharp, but his eyes betraying a hint of curiosity. He was a man who had maintained a strict distance from the prisoners, embodying the stern authority that Annalisa had come to expect. "I'm just watching," she stuttered, her cheeks flushing under his scrutiny. "Watching?" he echoed, a brow raised. "You'd best keep your distance, lass. We're not the ones you should be worried about." Annalisa felt the weight of his words, the caution laced within them. "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand." "Understand what?" Ewan pressed, his expression softening slightly. "Why you share your food? Why you laugh?" she felt compelled to ask, the words spilling forth before she could stop them. I thought you were supposed to be the enemy." He studied her for a moment, his gaze penetrating. We're all human here, Annalisa. You might see us as the enemy, but we have families waiting for us too. We fight because we must, not because we want to." His words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the barriers she had built began to tremble. Annalisa nodded, the implications of his statement washing over her. "But you are still different," she whispered, grappling with the notion that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been wrong. "Different doesn't mean less human," Ewan replied, his voice steady. "You'll find that out if you let yourself." She watched as he turned away, leaving her with a swirl of emotions. Confusion, curiosity, and an unexpected spark of hope. She was left alone with her thoughts, the conflict inside her growing stronger. Would she allow herself to see them as more than just soldiers? Could she embrace the humanity she was beginning to recognize? As the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Annalisa felt a sense of urgency. This was a pivotal moment, and she could feel the weight of her past beliefs pressing down on her shoulders. But she also felt the stirrings of something new, a desire to understand, to connect, to transcend the boundaries that had been imposed upon her. Before she could dwell further on her thoughts, Annalisa glanced back at the soldiers, who were now sharing stories, laughter punctuating the air. A voice inside her urged her to step forward, to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding that had long defined her existence. But fear held her back, wrapping around her like a vice. This single moment would redefine her entire world. Before we uncover why, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, back to 1945. As Annalisa continued to observe, she became acutely aware of the complexities of war, of the men and women whose lives had been intertwined through conflict. Each act of kindness she witnessed chipped away at the walls of her indoctrination. She felt the stirrings of empathy blossom within her, the longing to connect with those whom she had been conditioned to despise. This was not merely a struggle for survival, it was a battle for her very soul. Would she choose to remain entrenched in her past, or would she venture into the unknown, confronting her biases and embracing the humanity that lay before her? If you're moved by Annalisa's journey and the stories of those who lived through such tumultuous times, consider subscribing to our channel. Together we can delve deeper into the narratives that shape our understanding of history and challenge our perceptions of those we deem as others. Join our community and help us uncover the stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you for being with us on this journey. The evening shadows grew long as Annalisa stood at the precipice of change, her heart racing with the promise of what lay ahead. Annalisa Müller stood frozen in place, her breath hitching in her throat as she watched Private Thomas Bennett break off a piece of his meager ration of bread. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that mingled with the echoes of laughter from the British soldiers, a sound so foreign yet filled with a warmth she had thought reserved only for allies. She strained her ears, catching snippets of their conversation, the cadence of their voices mingling with the rustling leaves of the barren trees surrounding the camp. "Save some for yourself, mate," one soldier teased, his tone light yet tinged with an undercurrent of worry. Thomas shook his head, his blue eyes glimmering with resolve. "He needs it more than I do," he said, his voice steady despite the fatigue etched across his face. "We can manage." Annalisa felt her heart race, a mix of awe and confusion swirling within her. This was the enemy, the very monsters she had been taught to despise. Her mind screamed at her to turn away, to retreat back into the safety of her indoctrination, yet her legs felt rooted to the ground, as if the earth itself was holding her in place. "This can't be right," she thought, her pulse quickening. She could almost hear the echoes of her childhood, her mother's warning about the treachery of the Allies, her father's disdain for anyone wearing that uniform. The words were etched into her brain, but here was a reality that shattered them into a million pieces. The scene unfolded as if in slow motion. Thomas handed the bread to a fellow soldier, who looked as though the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. Annalisa could see the gratitude in the man's eyes, the way he clutched the bread as if it were a lifeline. The soldier took a huge bite, and something deep within Annalisa cracked wide open. Unable to hold back any longer, she stepped forward, curiosity overtaking her fear. The moment felt surreal, her heart pounding furiously as she approached the group. She could see the soldiers more clearly now, their worn uniforms, the dirt smudges on their faces, the weariness that spoke volumes of their own struggles. They were not the faceless enemies from her propaganda-laden childhood. They were human beings, just like her. "Why do you help him?" she blurted out, the question escaping before she could stop it. The words hung heavy in the air, a challenge and a plea wrapped into one. The laughter ceased and all eyes turned to her. Annalisa felt exposed, her heart racing as she faced the unexpected scrutiny. Thomas's gaze softened, and he stepped forward, the distance between them shrinking rapidly. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied, his voice calm and steady, devoid of any malice. "We may be on opposite sides, but we're still human. We have to look out for one another." "But," she stammered, grappling with the dissonance in her mind, "you are supposed to hate us. We are enemies." A heavy silence enveloped the group, and Annalisa could see the flicker of surprise in their expressions. Did they truly not hold the same contempt she had been raised to believe? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow, and yet she found herself longing to understand. "Enemies?" Thomas echoed, his brow furrowing. "We've been told that too, haven't we? But war, it's a strange thing. It brings out the worst and the best in people." He gestured to his comrades, who nodded in agreement, their expressions shifting from surprise to understanding, a shared recognition of the absurdity of their situation. Annalisa's heart ached with a longing she couldn't quite place. She had been trained to view these men as the epitome of evil, yet here they stood, embodying kindness in a world that had turned so dark. Suddenly, the weight of her upbringing pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. She felt a wave of shame wash over her, an overwhelming desire to distance herself from the narrow-mindedness of her past. But it was too late. The cracks in her perception had already begun to widen, and she couldn't ignore the humanity standing before her. A soldier took a step forward, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "No," she whispered, shaking her head as the tears threatened to spill over. "I'm just trying to understand." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the group, and Annalisa felt a strange sense of belonging. The discomfort she had expected from the soldiers was replaced with an unexpected camaraderie. They were not beasts. They were men burdened by the same fears she carried. "Come sit with us," Thomas offered, motioning to a small patch of ground beside them. "You can share our rations if you like. It's not much, but it's better than nothing." The offer stunned her, and for a moment she hesitated. Could she really sit amongst them, share in their meager meal, and in doing so, challenge everything she had ever believed? Yet the thought of refusing felt unbearable. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve, and moved closer. As she settled down beside them, the soldiers resumed their conversation, a blend of light-hearted banter and serious discussions about their families waiting for them back home. Each story they shared felt like an arrow piercing through the armor she had built around her heart. They spoke of love and loss, of plans for the future, and the warmth in their voices was a stark contrast to the coldness she had known. Annalisa listened intently, absorbing every word, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow and hope. It was as if they were painting a picture of life beyond the war, a life she had been conditioned to think was impossible for anyone wearing the enemy's uniform. The line between us and them blurred, and she found herself laughing at their jokes, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating. But just as the warmth wrapped around her like a comforting blanket, the moment was shattered. Sergeant Ewan Clark entered the scene, his presence commanding and rigid. He surveyed the group, his hawkish eyes narrowing as he caught sight of Annalisa sitting amongst the soldiers. The air grew heavy with tension, as if the very atmosphere shifted. "What's going on here?" Clark barked, his voice slicing through the warmth like a shard of ice. Annalisa's heart raced, instinctively feeling the need to retreat. The laughter dissipated, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Thomas stood, his posture straightening, the easy camaraderie vanishing in an instant. "We were just," he began, but Clark interrupted him, his gaze piercing. "This is a POW camp, not a gathering for tea and biscuits. Get back to your posts." His tone was harsh, and Annalisa felt a chill settle in her bones. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a wave, threatening to pull her under. "But they were just sharing," she started, her voice wavering, but Clark's glare silenced her. "Enough!" he snapped, his frustration palpable. "You will not undermine the authority of this camp. Return to your section immediately." Annalisa felt a surge of anger rise within her, a feeling that was new and invigorating. She had spent too long being afraid, too long being conditioned to submit. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady, surprising even herself. "For they were just being kind. Clark's eyes narrowed further, disbelief crossing his features. Kindness? In war? Don't be naive, miss. You should remember where you are. But I'm not just a prisoner. I'm a human being. The words escaped her lips before she could fully comprehend the weight of them. The tension in the air thickened, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Clark's expression shifted, an imperceptible flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. You think this is a game? He demanded, his voice lowering, but the anger in his eyes faltered. No, Annalisa replied, her heart pounding. I think we're all trapped in this game, and it's time we started to see each other as people. The soldiers around her held their breaths, and for the first time, Annalisa felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had confronted the very embodiment of her indoctrination, and in that moment, she felt the chains of her upbringing start to loosen. Clark hesitated, caught off guard by her defiance. You do well to remember your place, he warned, but his voice lacked the conviction it had held moments before. Maybe it's time to change what that place is, Annalisa countered, her voice strong. The soldiers exchanged glances, and she could see the flicker of hope mirrored in their eyes. Clark's facade began to crack, and for just a moment Annalisa saw a glimpse of the humanity beneath the hardened exterior. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of authority he wore so well. Enough! He turned sharply, his boots crunching against the gravel as he stormed away, leaving behind a palpable tension that hung in the air. The moment had shifted, and as Annalisa turned back to the soldiers, their expressions were a mix of admiration and disbelief. Thomas stepped closer, his gaze steady and reassuring. You were brave, he said softly, admiration evident in his voice. I didn't think anyone would stand up to him like that. Annalise felt her cheeks warm at the praise, but deep down she realized the truth. She had not just stood up for herself. She had stood up for the humanity she was beginning to see in them. It was a turning point, a moment of clarity that would reverberate through her life long after the war had ended. But even amidst the warmth of shared humanity, a chilling truth loomed over her, a truth that would haunt her for years to come. She had begun to understand that labels and ideologies had blinded her to the very essence of what it meant to be human. And now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she could feel the weight of that revelation pressing down on her, a burden she would carry forward into an uncertain future. What would she do now with this newfound understanding? The answer lingered just out of reach, but one thing was clear. The world she had known was irrevocably changed, and as she looked into the eyes of her former enemies, she felt a flicker of hope amidst the shadows of despair. It was not the last of the rations that would break the cycle of hatred, but the first act of kindness that would pave the way for understanding. Annalisa knew she would never forget this moment, this pivotal encounter that would define her future, a future where humanity triumphed over enmity. And as the darkness enveloped the camp, the embers of change began to glow, igniting a fire that could not be extinguished. As the days turned into weeks, the chill of the late 1945 air became a constant companion for Annalisa Müller. She found herself gradually stepping out of the shadows of her preconceived notions. The more she observed the British soldiers, the more she recognized their humanity, a concept that had been obscured by the rigid ideology she had absorbed throughout her life. After witnessing Private Thomas Bennett share his rations, Annalisa's internal conflict reached a boiling point. She could no longer ignore the kindness and vulnerability in the soldiers' eyes. They were not the monsters her upbringing had painted them to be. They were individuals, each with their own fears, hopes, and stories. It began with small interactions. One afternoon, as she sat on a cold bench, her gaze drawn to the soldiers playing cards, she felt an unexpected impulse to approach them. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. The card game paused, and 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her, curiosity mingling with caution. "Would you like to join us?" Thomas asked, his tone inviting, as if she were not the enemy but a fellow human being. Annalisa hesitated. The weight of her past beliefs pressed down on her, but the warmth in Thomas's voice urged her forward. I could watch," she offered, taking a tentative step closer. The soldiers exchanged glances, and a smile broke across Thomas's face, lifting the tension in the air. "Watching is fine, but we could use a 4th player," he replied, motioning for her to sit. As she joined them, Annalisa felt a wave of apprehension wash over her. The game was simple, a way to pass the time, But what she found was the beginnings of a friendship that defied the boundaries set by war. Day by day, she learned their names, Thomas, Ewan, and a quiet lad named Michael. And in their laughter, she discovered pieces of her own lost humanity. With each shared moment, Annalise's perspective shifted. She began to see the soldiers as brothers, men who had been thrust into a conflict they did not choose. They shared tales of home, of families waiting anxiously for their return, of dreams interrupted by the chaos of war. Their stories, once foreign and frightening, began to resonate deeply within her. One evening, Thomas invited her to help with a small medical issue in the makeshift infirmary. Knowing her background as a nurse, Annalise was hesitant, but felt an undeniable urge to contribute. As she worked alongside him, stitching a minor wound on one of the soldiers, she felt a sense of purpose. The camaraderie of the moment was palpable, and for the first time since arriving at the camp, she felt like she belonged. Days turned into weeks, and the war's end drew closer. The food shortages continued, and the atmosphere grew tense as the soldiers faced the uncertainty of what the future held. Annalise often found herself sharing rations with them, each piece of bread or sip of water, a silent pact of solidarity. It was a far cry from the animosity she had once felt, replaced now by a deep-seated empathy. However, the most profound change took place within Annalise's heart. She began to question the narratives that had defined her life. The teachings of hate and division began to dissolve, replaced with a new understanding of humanity. She realized that her previous beliefs had been a shield, a way to protect herself from the truth of the suffering surrounding her. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Annalise gathered the courage to speak her truth. She found Thomas sitting alone, staring out at the rolling hills beyond the camp. "Thomas," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to thank you for everything. You've shown me kindness when I didn't expect it, when I didn't think I deserved it." Thomas turned to her, his expression softening. "Annalise, we're all just trying to get through this. You've shown us strength. It takes courage to open your heart, especially after everything you've experienced." At that moment, Annalise felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her journey had transformed her from a prisoner of war into a prisoner of her own misunderstandings. She no longer saw the British soldiers as the enemy. Instead, they were her allies in an uncertain world. As the war concluded and the camp began to empty, Annalise faced a new challenge. What would her life look like beyond the barbed wire? She had witnessed the power of empathy and the strength found in connection, and she knew her life's mission was to foster understanding. Months later, as she walked through the streets of Berlin, now devoid of the war's immediate scars, Annalise made a promise to herself. She would share her story, the transformation she experienced, and the importance of seeing the humanity in others. She wrote letters to the soldiers she had befriended, maintaining those connections that had changed her so profoundly. "Stories like ours," she would write, "remind us that behind the uniforms, the flags, and the ideologies, there are always human beings. Our capacity for empathy is the most powerful weapon against hatred." And as she shared her experiences with others, Annalise felt a sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that her story could ignite change in someone else's heart. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Annalise Müller's life, a story that transcends borders and reminds us that understanding and compassion can emerge even in the darkest of times. If you believe in the power of stories to change hearts and minds, join our community of history lovers by subscribing to the channel. Together, let's continue to bring these vital narratives out of the shadows, ensuring that the lessons of our past guide us towards a brighter future. Leave us a comment below about a time when you experienced a shift in perspective. Your thoughts are important to us as we continue to explore the vast tapestry of humanity that connects us all. Thank you for watching.